Adam, you were coming to us this week with a story you wanted to talk about. Speaking of game rights,
I was more just like speaking of digital code, I guess. Um, I'm not going to get too big in the specifics, but those who are aware, at least in gaming, Take Two is currently in legal proceedings with four modders from around the world who basically did a I guess a re-release with much more like bug fixing and patching to GTA 3 and GTA Vice City. And I'm going to like for the at the very bare minimum, like all Takes Two is trying to say is that hey, they're using our content, it's copywritten, and that's like they can't do that, so we're suing them for damages. And the opposite is just saying like hey, it's they're mostly going with fair use, but there's a few other things in between. I want to start with the moral stuff first because I feel if I get too deep into the specifics, we're going to kind of lose face of that. So I want to just strictly say two things. One, it's very obvious that Take Two doesn't actually care about this case. But now that they have a trilogy that they're releasing, all of a sudden now they care because these projects have existed forever and they did nothing. So it's obvious that they never cared about this, but now that there was a monetary incentive to care, now they did. And then the second one is I don't really care what the legal proceedings say. They're not making money off of these mods, so as far as I'm concerned, I don't think it's something that's worth getting damages for because there's no monetary damage to it. In fact, it probably gets people more likely to spend money on their game in the first place because it's not like it's a re-release that you pay money for and it has nothing to do with Take Two. You have to buy the game from them to be able to play it. So it's not a case of, you're buying an off version of GTA 3 from another storefront. You're literally buying a copy from Rockstar, but you use the mods from this team to make the game run better. Now, do you want to comment on the moral stuff before I get into the specifics?
No, I think I'm in agreement from a morality standpoint. Like, hey, if you're building something creative and different, like fair use and stuff. I think there's a Pandora's box that we're going to talk about, but I think that dives more into the legal aspect of this, and so I'll let you continue.
Yeah, I mean, the gist honestly is Rockstar are being real greedy pieces of shit for doing this. I don't think anybody, outside of the company thinks otherwise because you as gamers to go, this is bullshit, like they should be paying Rockstar money for doing this stuff, you're an idiot. Sorry, but it's free mods. You should be happy that somebody gave a shit enough about this game. But in terms of the legal stuff, that's where it gets a little bit murkier, right? Because they're trying to use fair use. But it's also a dicey road for them to go because it's not like they just put in patches. They did reverse engineer the source code. And I think that's where things get murky. I do agree that it shouldn't be considered, copyright infringement because it's not like they're just copying the exact code and then repurposing it for something else. They're literally taking the game that they have not touched in forever and just fixing it. I don't think that's something that should be sued unless, you're Rockstar and you're about to release a really broken version of that, and then you really want to make sure nobody else can show how amazing that it is when you actually put a slight bit of effort into it. But, like, I get where the legal casing might be a little bit more difficult because they didn't do what, say, which Smash, I think it was Project M was the Super Smash Brothers project, because what they did is they create a tool so that it would just patch on top of the original source code, whereas in this case, the modders that are being sued, it's literally the full source code posted plus the fixes, which I think is where it gets a little bit more murky.
Yeah, I think for me, like morally, I side with the creators. Like, hey, if you're just taking a game and tweaking it, that's fine. But I totally get where Take Two's coming from, and I kind of
from a legal purpose.
From a legal point, and I don't think it's particularly that these people are doing something nefarious, but I think what it is that it's just Take Two protecting themselves, right? It's a situation where they are, clamping down on this to dissuade other people from modding it because these people are just doing it as a fan-made project, but they're now tweaking it, and once you let one person do it, it sets a precedent that other people can come and do it, and then you don't have control over that game, and you don't have control over that source code at that point. And so unless you start vetting and picking and choosing who can do it, it makes sense why you kind of put a stop to that
I
when they're
don't know if
messing with your
suing though is the correct way. Like I didn't mention this in the moral aspect of it. Why was this not just a cease and desist?
Do we not know that it wasn't started as a cease and desist?
I don't know beyond that. All I
Yeah.
know is about the actual like the actual suing.
Yeah. So I would imagine that probably started as a cease and desist, and then it has escalated to this. And I think
Okay,
it's just
so the gist is they filed a DMCA, the team fired back with a counter notice, and it was restored, and then Take-Two filed the lawsuit. So in
Yeah.
other words, they tried to just do a cease and desist. They countered, and it was given in their favor, and now they're suing. So that's
Yeah.
that to me that comes off as being a little salty at this point.
I don't know. No, I think they're still just protecting their assets and protecting their property and kind of protecting themselves from other people coming in. Because like, what if you have a situation where you have like once you start opening up the case to modders, you don't really have control unless you start a whole vetted community of it. You can run the risk of who knows what they put into it, and then
Yeah,
can it
but
come
I
back to
mean,
you,
we're talking about a case that I don't know if it necessarily applies. I think they're just trying to get a court proceeding to actually put a precedent down so they don't have to deal with it anymore. To which
Exactly.
I go, that's really shitty to do though to a bunch of developers that have nothing to do with what you're fighting. Like that's where like the morality of me is really pissed off at this, and I'm trying to like keep that in check when I go through the legal aspects of all.
Yeah,
this.
and once again, I'm totally agreeing with you from the moral aspect, but I'm just saying from a legal aspect, I get it. I don't necessarily support it, but I see their
And
logic,
that's the
and
problem with us being on the outside here is we don't really give a fuck about the legal, because as far as we're concerned, well, this is just billionaire companies being real assholish with their properties and making sure they have full control. To which I say, I guess if that's your legal right, sure, but I'm gonna call you out for being a greedy bitch about it.
Well, I mean, would it be the case if you had the same thing if it was a small indie developer doing that?
No, I don't think I would change my opinion.
Okay.
Because we're not talking about somebody taking the code and then completely making a game using that code. We're talking about them fixing it. Like to me, like from a morality standpoint, again, we're talking about a group of 4 guys who love this game and want it to be the best version of that game, and they're not doing anything to like shit on it. They're just fixing all the little things that honestly, like Take-Two just wouldn't be able to get around to, because that kind of company can't just spend 7 years fully fixing a game. Now, granted, we have companies that can't do even like a full year of fixing their games, so that's a whole different conversation. But in this specific case, my brain goes like, dude, these guys aren't doing anything to make money off of your game. They're just fixing it. Like, if your worry is that people are going to take your original source code and start to make like profit off of by making like full on better versions of your game, fine, but they're not making a profit of any kind. That's where my argument goes. Like, dude, I get why you're doing it, but you're doing it against a bunch of guys that, to every bit of knowledge that I can see in front of me, have not made a cent off of this. And that's kind of where it gets like into the legal trouble of like, I feel like they're just trying to set a precedent. Now there is a precedent of sorts. It's kind of not fully related to this, but Game Genie back in '92 was sued. The company Galoob that made it was sued by Nintendo of America, and Nintendo lost because the judge ruled in favor of Galoob, saying that it was not, completely taking their games and turning it into derivative work. It was like, what was the thing? I'm trying to find the paragraph here.
Wasn't it because like Game Genie wasn't necessarily interfering with the source code or something like that?
No, it was literally just like, it's like almost like it was turning pieces of the code off, essentially. So the way that the judge, I found the paragraph, the judge, Fern M. Smith, ruled it as comparing the usage of Game Genie to skipping portions of a book or fast-forwarding through a purchased movie. Thus, the altered game content did not constitute the creation of derivative work, as Nintendo had argued. Smith wrote that having paid Nintendo a fair return, the consumer may experiment with the product and create new variations of play for personal enjoyment without creating a derivative work. So, to take that statement, I still look at what this specific situation calls for, and I don't necessarily know if this falls into like something that they could sue for, because my brain's still going in the direction of they're not doing anything maliciously. They're just. But this is again where the legal system is just way. I'm not a lawyer. I'm not gonna have a clue on what this.
I was gonna say illegal doesn't always relate to malicious, right?
Yeah. But like in the end, we're still talking about not anything overlapping. They're not like putting, when you see people try to modify multiple games into each other, they're not doing anything like that. They're literally just patching fixes. Now, as some people have said, including somebody who claimed to be part of the Project M team from that Smash thing I told you about, they said that honestly, if they had just used it as a tool and started from the ground up and just like adding into it rather than using the source code directly and offering the source code as part of the download, I think that's where they're finding their problem. I think that's where the legality can come into play, is because when you download this mod, you're downloading the code and the fixes. Whereas if you did it as a patch, this might have completely avoided the situation entirely.
Okay. Yeah.
It's a weird overall situation. It just comes from both ways. From a morale standpoint, Take-Two can go fuck themselves. But from a legal standpoint, well, that's we're not lawyers. We're not going to really be able to be too dug into it. My brain goes, I feel like this should be considered fair use, but that's for a judge to rule, not me. If I had the opinion on it, I think that should be considered fair use, because I don't feel like that's doing something that would be considered like taking copywritten content, because they're not making any money off of it and they're not doing anything to overlap it with something else. They're just fixing the game. And again, for the morality issue, sorry, Take-Two, that you are a little bit butthurt that somebody is apparently good at doing their job and you guys apparently can ship a game out with absolutely 1,000 bugs that you couldn't be asked to, fix. That's the thing, like, yeah. The judge will do whatever the judge wants to do and give them the monetary value that they think is worth it, but every gamer on the outside should be looking at Take-Two being right now and being like, this would have just never happened if you fix your shit. Like, again, It goes back to what we said 1,000 times. If you just release the game in good condition, this doesn't happen.
Yeah, I mean, there's always going to be modders and people modding things.
And people are glad that people do it. Like, how many Cyberpunk PC players were so ecstatic that people were fixing the game faster than CD Projekt Red was?
Mm-hmm.